welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast, your guide to help you manage life, money, and multiples. Each episode, host Paul Fenner, Tama Capital's president and founder, and the proud parent of 4 amazing children, including 1 set of triplets, will provide insights on successfully sustaining an active lifestyle, career, and family through comprehensive wealth management strategies, financial education, and lifestyle planning, specific to parents raising twins, triplets, and more. Learn more, subscribe to the show, or connect with Paul at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
How can you link hostage negotiating with building better relationships with your family, spouse, partner, or kids? How can you keep your emotions in check when situations become intense? Gary Noesner spent over 30 years in the FBI, 10 of which were as the Chief Crisis Negotiator. A few of you may know Gary from the Netflix series Waco, as Gary was one of the negotiators between the FBI and the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. From dealing with highly intense situations, Gary has turned his experience and expertise into helping people build better relationships through active listening. The ability to respond to someone shows that you are indeed listening. Gary uses M&amp candy on how to do this. Consider that in every conversation you have with somebody, the chocolate center is the story. What are they trying to tell you? While the outer shell of the candy is a reflection of emotion. How are they feeling? Gary points out that it costs nothing to be a good listener, especially with our spouse, partner, or kids. As in most hostage situations that Gary was involved with, people want to be heard, and our families are no different. From Gary's perspective, this cornerstone of being a good listener and communicator is self-control. Think of a teeter-totter. When our emotions are high, our rational behavior goes down. So we must focus on our emotions and lowering our own temperature when situations become intense. Please enjoy my conversation with Gary Noesner. So Gary Noesner, welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. You notice I almost screwed that up. We were just talking about that before we recorded.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So where I would like to start, because I would imagine most of my audience does not know who Gary Noesner is, but I actually found your work through a New York Times article, and the title of that, and I'll link to it in the show notes, was Become a Better Listener, Your Family Will Thank You. And that grabbed my attention pretty fast because as we were talking off air, I have this unique situation where I'm a dad of a set of almost 12-year-old triplets and a 10-year-old. So I'm always trying to find ways to be a better parent, and a lot of that, and husband, and a lot of that stems from trying to listen, which I don't know. I'm hoping to gain a lot of knowledge from you today on this topic, Gary. But why don't we start with your background, which is just unbelievably fascinating because you used to be a lead hostage negotiator with the FBI.
Well, I spent 30 years in the FBI, and I always joke around and say my parents gave me to the FBI at a young age, and it's something I wanted to do since I was a young kid, and through serendipity, my dreams came true, and I just loved the career. It was fascinating and constantly challenging and interesting, and all that, everything I could have hoped for. But fairly early in my career, I got involved in what was then a new and emerging discipline within law enforcement, and that's hostage negotiations, which was started by the New York City Police Department and quickly adopted by the FBI. And then we devoted a lot of resources into finding out more about how this worked in a scientific manner and spreading the word around the world and around the United States and gaining insights from the experiences of police officers. And so I spent the first 10 or 12 years as a negotiator being a part-time function in addition to investigating terrorism. Much of my career was devoted towards overseas hijackings of Americans in the Middle East primarily. But then in 1990, I became a full-time negotiator. At that time, there was only 3 in the FBI. And the rest of the 350 negotiators, it's an auxiliary secondary function to whatever other investigative assignment they have. But in that capacity, went through a lot of situations: prison riots, right-wing militia standoffs, religious zealot sieges like Waco, the Montana Freeman siege. I flew down to Peru when the Japanese ambassador's residence was taken over by terrorists, and initially Americans were held. So worked a lot of hijackings, worked over 100 kidnappings of American citizens abroad. So from those collective lessons, I've tried to formulate what are the key elements of effective communication that allowed us as law enforcement negotiators in very desperate situations to convince people not to harm themselves or someone else, and to cooperate and surrender peacefully. And the success rate for that is in the mid to high 90s, which is quite phenomenal considering the risk. And so that got me to think, well, if it works in these kinds of situations, these skills that we sort of really honed in on, wouldn't they apply more broadly in life and work? And I firmly believe they do. So I wrote my book, Stalling for Time, in 2010 by Random House, and it's done very well. And it tells about my journey and the journey of negotiations, and covers some of the major cases I worked and the lessons we learned in those experiences. I retired from the FBI in 2003. I became a consultant for control risk and international risk consultancy, and then wrote my book. Then since I've basically done corporate and law enforcement speaking engagements. My book was used in 2018 as part of the basis for the 6-part Waco miniseries by the Paramount Network that was later on Netflix and now is on Amazon Prime. They just finished filming a 2nd season, and again, the actor Michael Shannon is playing me. Not too shabby, twice Academy Award nominated actor and a great guy, and become a good friend. And also Netflix is working on a major documentary about Waco. Both of those will be out next year. So that's kind of how I keep busy these days, and do a lot of podcasts and interviews like this one. So have at it.
So yeah, and that's the thing is I've listened to a few of the podcasts that you've been on, which has been great. And I think as we're talking off air, a large, I think, population of the people that listen to my show are parents. And one of the things that I think drew me to your work was, how do you tie hostage negotiating with building better relationships with your family, in particular your spouse and your children? Like, how do you make that connection? You kind of alluded to that, like you had all this experience negotiating in these really high risk, high tense situations, and now you've kind of pivoted to everyday normal life people like me in my situation. And like I mentioned to you, like every day when I get 4 kids off to the school bus is a journey. And today it wasn't a very good one because I ended up having to have a stern conversation with one of my boys about what a healthy lunch was. And so he ended up walking to the bus stop in tears, which never makes you feel very good.
Well, as a parent, you're constantly tested. You never live up to your own expectations, but sometimes I think we're a bit hard on ourselves and expecting too much. In the 70s and 80s, I started to hear the term supermom, which was very appropriate. I mean, modern day women, not only were they expected to do the traditional tasks of a wife and mother, but now they go to work. So, they did the majority of the cleaning and the majority of the child care and running around to doctor's appointments. And it was truly appropriate to recognize that this new challenge that they face. But I also felt as though there was a category that didn't get any attention. That's super dad. Because, if you look back to my generation, I mean, I don't think my father knew where the kitchen was. I mean, he might have passed through it casually now and then. And historically, the role of men was seen to do the outside work, bring home the money, and everything else was left to mama. And But yet today, certainly my generation even, and I see it more with my son and my son-in-laws, I mean, they really pitch in. They're more fully engaged in every aspect of cleaning the home, preparing meals, taking care of the children, taking days off when the kids are sick. And these are things that just didn't happen 40 years ago. So, I think when you think about all those things in total, I think parents are under an incredible amount of strain, and you always have a lot going. And there's a curse. You have kids typically at a time of life when your careers demand the most from you. I mean, I'm working on an average day, 10 hours a day as a negotiator in the FBI. Well, you throw in an hour commute each way, and I'm gone from home 12 hours. And you come home and, you've got to play with the kids and, help with dinner, give them a bath, read a story, and then you're toast. You're absolutely wasted. And it just starts over and over and over and endlessly. I joke my kids now, they said, oh, I've got so much going on. I said, don't worry. It only lasts 20 years or so. Really throwing a fuel on the fire for them. But, it's just really tough. It's easy to lose your temper. It's easy to lose your patience. But, the thing I always think about, and this touches me, and sometimes when I give a speech, I talk about this song and I choke up. It's Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. It's a very famous song. And it's a beautifully insightful song about, this kid always wants his father's time and attention. And dad, of course, whenever that occurs, is always busy doing something else and says, yeah, we'll do that later. We'll do that later. And then at the end of life, when the father's old and retired and wants time with his son, the son says, hey, sorry, Dad, I'm too busy. I got this going and that going. And, the old saying about what goes around comes around. And it's a sad but true reality for many people. I think the key to being a good parent is to not be so focused on the individual experiences and interactions, but the overall time you spend with your child and the love and devotion. While I was gone a lot in my career, I think I was a pretty good dad when I was home. I certainly didn't live up to my own expectations, or I certainly realized I probably could have been far better. But, I think that's important. Don't be hard on yourself. Realize that life is pulling you 30 different ways. Don't carry around this baggage full of guilt. Why can't I juggle 30 things at one time? Just do what you can, attend to your job and your career. That's important, your financial security for your family, but try to spend as much time as you can with the kids and realize that that's not always going to be good time. People always say, oh, I don't spend much time with my kid, but it's quality time. I said, well, where's all the crappy time? Because, unless you're a super person, I don't know how you pull that off, because there is just times where kids going through the process of learning how to be adults, misbehave, throw fits, are inattentive, unresponsive, on and on and on and on. And that pushes all the buttons. And because of the history that we have with our family, they know those buttons very well.
They sure do.
And I think I mentioned to you off air, negotiations doesn't work at home. Well, that's not really true. But sometimes I found, as a negotiator, dealing with a gunman who I've never met before and didn't know anything about, creating a relationship of trust with that person can actually happen much quicker than if you're trying to resolve a nagging conflict with your family. You want your kid to do this activity, they don't want to do it, whatever it is. But there's history there. You've been going through this argument for weeks, for months, or whatever. And, you each know each other's buttons and trigger points, and that all enters into the equation. So, I think if I had overall advice for parents, and it's just spend time with them. I do it now I have 7 grandchildren, age 10 and under, and I get to see them, frequently. And, I just marvel now at the development of the human being. Things I didn't probably remember to recognize when my own kids were growing up because I was so busy. Now in my grandchildren, I sit there and marvel at the acquisition of speech and language and culture and mobility when they're younger. It's freaking fascinating. And it's a never endless story. Now, do they misbehave? You betcha. But what I try to do now is when they come up to me and say, Poppy, would you help me do this? Would you do that? I try my best to drop whatever I'm doing and give them that time. And I'm sure I fail to meet their expectations more often than not. But I like to think I try to be there and be attentive to them. And, we live on a beautiful lake and we have a nice dock and we swim off the dock. And, the kids are in the water and there's always got to be an adult around them. But, sometimes just being in the water with them, they're playing with each other, splashing, kicking, but just the fact that you're there, it means a lot. And it's hard to quantify that. What is the value of that? Your presence is worth a lot. Your time is worth more than any present you give them for Christmas or for their birthday or contribution to their college fund. They just want you, and of course it's a much easier task as a grandparent. I think everybody's aware of that. We're the ones that spoil them, fill them full of sugar and give them back to their parents, or, whatever the old joke is about that. But there's a bit of truth to that, by the way. But I just think today, a lot of the causes of our stress and anxieties, our psychological problems, is we see through the media people that seemingly have this perfect life. They got their act together and look how great, the wonderful parents are always smiling when I see them. Everybody's happy. Their kids aren't throwing a fit. Well, you're not around them 24 hours a day. And, they have the same issues and flaws and challenges you do. So I guess my overall advice, don't be so hard on yourself. Just be attentive and be realistic about your expectations about, what we can do. It's, the other thing I note is men are particularly guilty at this. We, based on the way our fathers generally treat us, we go into lecture mode pretty quickly. So you've got this young kid and you say, well, let me explain to you the value of purchasing a toy and how much work has to be done. But, and meanwhile, the kid's eyes glass over. They have no idea what you're talking about. So the lectures that we are prone to give, for lack of a better term, I used to dread those when my father gave those to me. I'd go up to him and say, Dad, I got a date tonight, and can I borrow, $5 for, the movie theater, whatever like that. And I'd have to sit down and go through a half-hour lecture on the value of money and how I was going to pay this back and what sort of interest rate there would be involved. After a while, I just said, never mind, I'll go earn it before I ask somebody out, But, kids don't really listen to that stuff. What your kids do is they watch you. When you and your wife go out to a restaurant with the family, how do you treat the wait staff? Do you hold the door open for your wife or some elderly lady coming out that's using a cane? Are you polite? Are you respectful? That's what they're going to copy. You don't have to sit down and give them a lecture on being polite and respectful. They see it and they absorb it. And even though they may hate you at a certain point in life or think they do, they still copy that and mimic it. And that's the most powerful lesson you can impart, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Gary, because I often wonder, because I feel like my kids at this point are following like the bad traits of mine. And I wonder if they're ever going to pick up the good traits. And a lot of it comes back to working. Like I work quite a bit. That my kids and Teresa, my wife, know how passionate I am about what I do as a financial advisor and how I pour into I call them my TAMA families. And, I always get the question like, Dad, you work a lot. And I'm like, yeah, well, this is why I work a lot. I work to help support other families that need, my help. I work hard to, have the lifestyle that we have. And so in the back of my mind, I'm always hopeful that they see that as a positive and something that they pick up on. I don't necessarily see it right now. I see it a little bit in my oldest daughter, but it's still a struggle.
No, I think it will manifest itself later. And here's an example of that. How many times in your life or Teresa's life have you caught yourself saying something and the first thing you say is, oh my God, my father used to say that to me.
All the time.
All the time. We all do that, right? What that is a manifestation of is the fact that you were watching mom or dad way back. And in turn, your kids will watch you. Yes, you probably spend too much time at work sometimes, but but that's not all a negative. I mean, your parents see you're committed, industrious. You feel passionate about your work and what you're doing, and I mean that has transferable value as well. I mean, you think of the opposite. What if they got a lazy bum of a father that sits around and never does anything? That's the model. It's no surprise that I've known great parents who end up with troubled kids, and I've known kids that come out great and their parents are all dysfunctional. But generally speaking, you reap what you sow, and if parents are attentive and giving, and they get the love back, the kids may be at a point in development where they don't walk up to you every day and say, "Mom and Dad, you're fantastic. I love you. Thank you for all these lessons." But they're getting it nonetheless, and I think, we went through that when our kids went off to school and college and everything. And the fact that they enjoy seeing us so much now and hanging around with us, and we share so many good times as adults, that's proof in the pudding, right there. And I think you'll get to that point too. It won't be. In fact, it's very quick. You won't. Your 12-year-old triplets. You're going to blink an eye, and next thing you know, you're setting up weddings, and you're draining your college funds, and you're buying cars, and they're off. Your daughter drives off, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to get a fender bender in the parking lot." Your sons drive off, and you worry all night long that they're going to kill somebody. And
right.
That's just the way it goes. I don't think you ever stop being a parent. I mean, I certainly haven't. My kids are, adults. They're 42, 40, and 38. But I failed with my son. He went on to be a Navy SEAL, and it's just, he went to the dark side. And
that is very ironic that you made that comment, Gary, about you're always a parent, because I remember sitting in the NICU on December 31st, 2010, the year of my trip. So my triplets were born on December 9th of 2010. And I remember the head doctor in the NICU telling us a story about how her daughter was in Chicago for New Year's Eve, and how she was just completely worried about her. And her daughter was like 22, 23, completely responsible young lady. And she's like, just know parenting now it'll never end. It doesn't matter what age they are at. It never ends.
There's a great movie. It was a Steve Martin movie called Parenthood.
Yes.
And Steve Martin is sort of the good son. Jason Robards is the father. And I think it's Tom Hulce is the son that has consistently screwed up everything in his life. And Steve Martin becomes frustrated and expresses to his father, Jason Robards, how come he gets all the attention? I'm the good one. And the father basically says, he needs more of me than you do, and you never stop being a parent. And I always remembered that line. And I said, wow, there's a lot of truth to that. And obviously your kids become increasingly independent if you've done a good job as a parent, but it doesn't mean that you're not still engaged with their life and you want to be part of their life. And, if you're able to, at an older age, still have your children enjoy being around you, I mean, that's the trifecta right there.
Yeah, that's a big plus. And there's something else I wanted to touch on that you had said a few minutes ago too, is that I think over this last year, and I've had this conversation with all sorts of parents, and that's the great thing about being in the industry that I am and do what I do, is I have all these families I work with that are at various stages in their life. I've seen kids grow up that I've worked with. Now I work with them. I have, families that have kids similar ages to mine. I have similar kids that are in college. And the one thing I think over this past year, I've really tried to focus on, and again, I'm probably goes back to being too hard on yourself, is I know that these moments are fleeting. And I realize that 12 and 10 years old, like you said, blink of an eye, they're going to be gone. And I look forward to that idea of having those relationships with my kids as grown adults, but I'm trying really hard not to get there right now, to try to hold on to these moments, because as everybody says, even the bad well, not necessarily maybe the bad times, but most of the time you're going to want those days back. And there's a country song, and I forget who sings it, maybe Trace Atkins. And you go around and around about, how babies are crying and, HVAC blew up or whatever. Like, you're going to want those days back. And it kind of goes back to the song, The Cat's in the Cradle. And I've really, again, tried hard to stick with that and make sure that I'm spending that time with them, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put that all in perspective when you're younger. I mean, I remember we had 3 kids, and on the weekends we're at the soccer field, or piano recital, or who knows what, and we met some wonderful people and had some great social interaction with other parents on the sidelines, and it was a joy watching our kids compete. I mean, I had more joy out of watching my kids in sports than when I think back of my own involvement in sports. And sometimes you think back and say, gosh, those were really good times. But in many ways, they were a pain in the ass. It's Saturday morning, we want to, have our coffee and a breakfast and sleep in or whatever, and not a chance. We're up and off and running, and that's just part of life. And, you can say, I want to slow it down or I want to speed it up. It doesn't matter what you want. It's going to happen at its own pace, and it's inevitable and you can't stop it. And, just like aging is, I'm at a point now, where I can't do things as well as I used to. I'm not as physically fit and not as limber or balanced or whatever. And, you just say, well, it's part of that you can stave off, but part of it's, the march of time and it affects it has on you. So I always love the concept of the person that lives every day to the fullest. But I mean, it's a bit of a, I don't know how many people that really, really do that. I mean, I know a lot of people say it, but, we just have to get by. We all are pulled in different directions. Even as a retiree, there's demands on your time and your energies, and, you just go along and do it. But I do think responsible, good human beings, parents, are way too hard on themselves, way too hard on themselves. And we expect far more than is probably practically possible for whatever that's worth. But, the thing is really, we get into the communication thing. It's listening and reflecting back. We have a tendency as humans to say, I hear you. But we really need to adopt what we call active listening, which goes back to Carl Rogers and the counseling field. And active listening means the way we respond acknowledges and demonstrates that we've heard. In other words, if you tell me a story, about your triplets being born, and if I say it back to you and I say, well, it was on what was it, December so-and-so and 2010, and you were in the NICU and the doctor came to you. And if I get all that back to you and reasonably correct, you're going to say, well, that old fart was listening,
Yeah.
He was listening. And then if I add on that layer, and it was such an exciting time for you to bring these 3 beautiful children into the world. And it was so special for you and your wife. You'll never forget it. Probably one of the best, if not the best day of your life. And if I nail that, when I tell that story back to you, I'm not just saying I've listened, I've proven it. I've demonstrated it. So we talk about in my field, it's a sort of a donut. If you think of or an M&M candy is a better illustration. If you think of the chocolate in the middle, that's the story. That's what happened, and such a date, you went here and you did this and you did that. But the candy coating around that chocolate, using the M&M metaphor, that's how you felt about it, the impact it had on you, the feelings it evoked. Now, when we respond to people, if we can remember, I've got 2 parts of this that I have to acknowledge. When my grandsons come up and talk to me about a soccer game they were in, and he saved the goal, and they won the game. Well, I not only, try to repeat what I know about the circumstance under which that happened, but how excited he was and how good that made him feel. That's how we communicate. That's how we are effective. People want to be listened to. They want to be understood. They want to be appreciated and valued and acknowledged. It's the cheapest thing we can do in a relationship. And I don't mean cheap as in of bad quality. I mean, it costs us nothing. And it in turn sets us up for those people to inquire and be interested in us and the story that we want to share with them. It's really important to relationship building. When you and Teresa go to a social function, next time you're in the neighborhood and you go to somebody's house and there's some new neighbors there you've never met, and she's in the kitchen with other people and you're out in the living room with a bunch of other people talking about something else, and there's a new person there. Doesn't matter the gender, whatever, they're in your little circle of conversation. And you say, I don't really know that person very well. And I think this is a good opportunity for me. I met him once briefly, but I'd like to know more about him and to find out where they're from, what's their journey. And you'll be shocked at the amazing things you learn about people. And there's probably going to be several points of commonality. Now, you may end up with somebody that you hate their guts, and that's going to happen too. But, for really valuable, well, I'll give you an example. There's a person I met not long ago, and my first impressions were very, very negative. I just said, this is not my kind of person. But after a couple more interactions, I really like that person now because I've come to appreciate it. I've listened, I've tried to understand their frame of reference. And now I better understand the nature of their type of humor that I didn't pick up on right away. Surprisingly, I usually am pretty good at that. But it just goes to show you, that, even the worst criminal I used to have to deal with, the most incorrigible, despicable human being, there's something good about him somewhere. And if you search for that and find some common connection, because in my old business, when we made that connection and when we were genuine and sincere, all of a sudden you'd hear people say like, Gary, I don't know how to get out of this. Well, my ears are picking up that now this person is soliciting my advice. And now I can be suggestive. So, well, I know that hurting anybody else isn't going to help your situation. And I really don't want to see you get hurt either. I'd like to help you. And here's some things you might consider doing. I have to earn the right to get to that point where I can offer those pieces of advice. If you just show up as a negotiator and say, hey, listen, jerk, you let those people go, we're going to come in and kill you. That's your choices. Well, that's just going to evoke a very defensive, aggressive response. And that's not what we want. I always think about, I have to earn the right. I have to demonstrate to someone else that I'm worthy of their respect. And you do that by giving.
This is actually, I was going to try to bring this back to this. How do you keep your emotions in check? And I think you kind of just walked through that. But Gary, do you think it's the same way with your spouse and your kids? Like, how do you make that connection? Because when I was listening to you, I'm just like thinking about, okay, how do I do this with Teresa? How do I do this with the kids?
It's tough with a spouse. And my wife and I, like every other couple, we've been married 48 years. I mean, we've certainly had our challenges. And a good bit of it is because when we're in our careers, like you and Teresa are, you're totally focused on career and raising those little urchins, and making them great human beings, feeding them, clothing them, educating them, giving them experiences. And one day when they're gone, you're at the table and you look across at this beautiful lady and you say, who are you?
Who are you? Yes.
Yeah. You look familiar to me, but because we tend to put our relationships on a back burner because we have other demands on our time and energy. And I think couples are well advised. And, I'm not saying I'm the expert here. I've certainly fallen flat on my face in this regard, but I think you have to make the time for each other. And, I'm going to get yelled at on this podcast because, saying there's differences between men and women, but, men are, tend to be, generally speaking, typically problem solvers.
Yes.
She comes to you and here's an issue and you say, okay, you do this, you do that, problem solved. What's the next problem, hon? And that's not really what they want.
Right.
Women generally are more engaged in the feeling aspect of what's going on and making sure you understand how they feel. She has a problem at work and brings it home, and you're just all over solving the problem for her. it's not really what she wants.
I swear, have you been living in my house, Gary? Because Teresa and I have been having, and she's gonna like, boy, you talked a lot about me on this podcast with this Gary Noesner guy. I'm like, but seriously, like we have been talking about this for probably the last month. It's been a real focus point, and I've been trying to change where she comes to me, wants to talk, and that's all she wants to do. She wants to talk. She just wants me to listen to her. And I've got to like really try hard not to go into Paul Fenner problem solving mode. And I've actually said, okay, do you need me to help you with this problem, or do you just need me to listen? And sometimes I'm successful in getting that out before I go into problem solving mode, but sometimes I'm not. But this is, you're spot on with what we're going through right now.
The only thing I would suggest is don't ask her if she wants you to listen. Just do it.
Just do it.
I'm going to refer you to an amazing, funny video. It's called "It's All About the Nail," and for all your listeners, I don't think it'll take anything away from it. But this woman is sitting on the couch with her husband, and she's talking about. She's got a nail sticking out of the middle of her head, and she's talking about all these problems. She's having headaches, and he says, "Well, it's there you are trying to solve my problem." You know, it's a beautiful illustration. It's a real short little video, but it's the cutest thing I've ever seen, and it's explained so well. And after a while, he finally gets saying, "Well, that must have felt bad when the nail was in your head." He's struggling to be a good listener, and you know the problem's so obvious to everybody, but it's quite cute. But yeah, I mean, I think we're all going to come up short on that equation. I mean, it's so true that it's the thing we take the most for granted of it is our relationship. Okay, this one's, we got the rings on, we went through the ceremony, we had the honeymoon. Okay, we're good. Now let's devote to these kids and buying this new car and the nice house in the suburbs and going on vacation to Disney World, whatever it is that you do. But then all of a sudden you got to remember, hey, there's this other human being here that we need to connect with. And, most arguments are over money, between couples and child rearing. Yeah. And I think the biggest bit of good fortune I had is my wife and I pretty across the board for all these years have not had disagreements in those two typically key areas of problems. And that's probably stood us well because my demanding career created many additional ones beyond that. Sometimes you just had to go and vacations canceled and events canceled and so forth and so on. But I think it's certainly time to work. I know some couples would say, every day at a certain time, we're going to sit down and spend some time, just the two of us. I think going out on a date night with your spouse, hiring a babysitter and, just saying, hey, and you have to do it in a routine fashion. Otherwise you just say you're going to do it. And you never get around. You
never do it. Yep.
Yeah. So you got to make it part of a routine. And, it's a tough adjustment. And then you move into a phase of life, which you will someday, that I'm in, where I don't go to work and she doesn't go to work and we're around each other, basically all day long. So, that's a whole new dynamic. Now you have each other on steroids and, we have our individual activities where we have alone time. Some, I play golf, she plays pickleball, whatever, that's fine. But you really do need, and I don't want any of your viewers to say, oh, this guy's so wise, he must have a perfect life. I mean, I screw this stuff up all the time. I'm the old guy that says, don't do what I do as I say, but we all have to work at that constantly. And I just don't think for 99.9% of the human population, anybody ever gets this perfect and it stays that way. If they do, they're probably pretty boring people, but they just, and it's okay to have a little separation time from your spouse. If you have an activity that you like and she doesn't like and she has one, support each other. That's okay. The old thing about, absence makes the heart sound good. I used to joke people. I said, I was in the FBI 30 years. I said, but I was only home 15. And that, that really helped us. So anyway, I'm babbling on here, but, I think these are things that are really worth thinking about. I think they're important things in our life. And I hope I'm getting better as I've gotten older. I'm I would call myself a work in progress, even with all the water that's passed over this dam, or whatever you want to say, or the water under the bridge. I don't know how you say it, but yeah.
So I want to. I know I only have you for a finite period of time, but I could keep going with all my questions and things that you picked up on. But I do want to circle back to one thing that I wanted you to talk about is your book, Stalling for Time. Could you provide us or give us an insight on one or two key takeaways that you would want us to take away from the book when we read it?
I think what I talk about cases I work, but within those incident chapters, I try to embed as many takeaway lessons as I can. I don't formally lay it out. Here's lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm hoping when somebody reads this, they can easily discern what it is I'm talking about that has transferability and more broadly in life. I think maybe the most important thing is self-control. And I think it's the cornerstone to being a good communicator. And the premise being, if you can't control your own emotions, how can you begin to expect to influence someone else? And you stop to think about it. Your kids are misbehaving, and you lose your cool and start yelling and screaming. Well, the battle's over. You've lost. So we have to keep control of that. Now, for some people, that comes natural. For other people,
like myself, it does not.
For other people, you have to work on it. And there's some people that, frankly, probably never be good at it. They just don't have that level of self-control. But that's really important. When we look at child rearing or other kinds of conflict, not that child rearing is all conflicts, but it's quite a common factor. You think of the childhood play yard, a teeter-totter, the seesaw, one kid's up, one kid's down. And this is the greatest graph. And I don't know who invented it. So, but I've been using it for, 40 something years. If you look at this, when emotions are high, okay, this is the baseline. When emotions are high, rational thinking and behavior are low. And I would argue that's irrefutable. I mean, you cannot argue against that given. When we are angry, charged up, red in the face, smoke out of your ears, whatever you want to say, we are not thinking and behaving in a rational manner. The key to resolving conflict or minimizing the damages from it is to first focus all your energy on lowering the emotional. And look what happens when I do that. The emotions come down and rational thinking and behavior rise. I think it's a really good thing to remember. That's our first task. I mean, if let's say you're in that social function that I used as a metaphor earlier, and you got somebody that's on the other end of the political spectrum, and they're all in a tizzy and angry over something you said. Well, you got a couple choices. You can say, well, have a great night and walk away, or or you can try to respond to them in a way that serves to lower that emotional content. Say, hey, I can tell this is a very important issue for you. You feel very passionate about it, and I'm sorry if anything I said offended, but I'm happy to discuss it with you. Could you explain to me how you feel about that particular issue? Again, I'm not sure if I fully understood you before. Anything that in and of itself makes it harder and harder for that person to continue the high level of arguing, because you have now kind of tried to lower the temperature. And I think that's a good way. So self-control is very important. In my book, I start each chapter with a quote, and it's my very favorite quote of all time from Rudyard Kipling. It's a partial quote. It says, if you can keep your head about you when all else are losing theirs. That's the attribute of a good negotiator, but it's also the attribute of an effective communicator writ large. If you can, I'm not saying emotions are always a bad thing. It's fine to feel passionate about something, but how you control that and how you channel that is what's really important. If you just get into a wild outburst and attack somebody instead of deal with the issue, then you've lost already. You've just lost. So I think self-control is clearly the most thing. And then asking again about my book and some of the lessons. we already talked about listening. There's two parts of listening that I think your listeners can really try to work on and listen. One is called, when you're responding to somebody, a restatement of content. Restatement of content. And the other is a reflection of emotions. So it's the same concept as that M&M candy I spoke about earlier. So when you're telling me about, some issue, some problem, some concern, it's important that I paraphrase in my own words what it is that you told me, the story. What is the issue that has drawn your attention and raised your concerns and raised your emotional reaction, whatever. And then and a second piece of that, to reflect the emotions that issue has evoked. It sounds so simple, and some people do it quite naturally, but if you consciously think about when I'm responding to someone, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. You can have a friend of yours that just got back from a vacation in Italy, and you say, hey, where did you go in Italy? Well, we went here and there. And well, what did you like about it? Well, we just loved going to the Amalfi Coast. And well, what was it that you found so exciting? You hear them get all excited about a place they visited, an experience they had, a restaurant they attended. And you feel, wow, it sounds like that place was amazing. They go, yes, it was. You should have been there. Oh, man, I wish I could have seen that. You are really demonstrating quite clearly that you're there with them, revisiting that experience. And they now feel like they really appreciated and understood what I was sharing with them. And that makes people feel good. And it's not cheap. It's not tawdry. It's not contrived. I mean, do it sincerely and genuinely. And it makes you, at the end of that conversation, that person will say to someone else, that Gary was, I really enjoyed talking to him about that. He really was kind of fun person to hang around with. Bingo, you've done it. And again, I think if people do this in a manipulative way, I deal with a lot of business negotiation experts now. I mean, they're all over the place on LinkedIn and Facebook, and they all have really interesting and good approaches and information. But for me, sometimes they're too prescriptive about always do this, set this up, don't offer this before they do that. And, for somebody involved in a very tight business negotiation, I'm not criticizing that at all. But for me, it's more basic than that. It's, if you're in sales or acquisitions or whatever you're doing, it's all about the relationship. Everything in life is about relationship. We're social animals. We depend on each other. We need each other. We cannot do it alone in whatever walk of life you're in. So, if you practice these skills and realize that, building this relationship will more likely than not lead to good outcomes. Because if I'm trying to give out a contract for my company, am I going to go with you, who I really like and enjoy, or some guy that I don't fully quite trust, that doesn't seem to really care about what I'm interested in? He just wants to tell me what he's prepared to do for me. Those are the things that make a difference. And I think it's important for people to remember that. So, restatement of content, the story, reflection of emotions, the feelings, and keeping your self-control in all kinds of situations. You can read hundreds of pages in books, but that's the core of it. That's the basis of it. And, even the business guru Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then to be understood. So, make an investment in time and energy, because people will respond in kind. If you have given them the time and attention to tell you, to share with you, to, illustrate whatever it might be, then eventually they will give you that same time because they've come to respect you and you're genuine. I mean, the attributes of a great negotiator: genuineness, sincerity, reliability, trustworthiness. It's almost like the Boy Scout code, and all these different things that make us be seen as decent, good human beings that people want to work with.
Well, Gary, like I said, I could keep going for like another hour at least, but let me bring us to our closing question, which I ask all my guests, but I'm gonna do yours in a little bit of a twist. Usually I ask what's the best thing about being a parent, but I know you have these 7 grandkids, right? 7
grandkids.
What is the best thing about being a grandparent?
I think the time I have with them now, when I don't remember this as well when my kids were growing up. Now we're going back almost 40 years, but I so am intrigued by the development of the human being. When I see my grandchildren, when they're little and develop motor skills and language skills, and now social skills, and how they engage. I'll be sitting in the front porch and I'm watching 2 cousins having a little argument or a disagreement or trying to figure out who gets to play with that particular toy next. There's only one of them. And I'm just fascinated by the whole damn thing because it's so predictive of where we end up as adults. And we're learning these things. It's like, I'm a sucker for these animal videos on YouTube, and you'll see 2 tigers, playing with a puppy or something like that. And it looks so cute and it's funny and all that. But they're learning how to pounce and hunt in that process. They're not doing it yet, but it's a precursor. And that's kind of what you see with the kids. So I think that's the thing I enjoy most about my grandkids, and it's just fun to watch as they become better swimmers because we live on a lake, so you see them in the water all the time, or they learning how to dive off the dock and all that stuff, which I just took as routine before. Now I'm fascinated by it.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, Gary. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you get a lot of requests like this, so I'm glad that you decided to spend some time with us on the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast. But I can't thank you enough for the time, and I really look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, and tell Teresa, not to be mad at me,
I will. I'll be sure to let her know.
Very good.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.